Hello, bonjour, and welcome to your new Bonin Private Wines video. In this video series that has now become a bit of a masterclass about everything that you should really know about wine and our newsletters, we've covered a few grape varieties so far. Grapes are, of course, an essential piece of knowledge to have to understand your vino, just like knowing what a piston is if you want to understand cars, or what a metaphor is if you want to understand literature better. We've talked about Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Syrah, Tempranillo from Spain. We've talked a bit about Sauvignon Blanc and Malbec in Argentina, of course. Today I want to tell you about a grape that has fallen out of favor before wine consumers, especially in the US. Wineries don't feature the name Merlot much on their labels anymore, since the Sideways movies in the mid-2000s and the rise of Pinot Noir from there. Yet, Merlot still not only makes some of the finest and most expensive wines on earth, but it's also an important component in many blends in many wine regions all across around the globe, whether wineries tell you about it or not. So it's a good piece of the wine puzzle to have in mind: Merlot, the unfairly disliked grape. Or maybe it is fair, we'll see. To understand Merlot and its importance in the world today, we need to understand a little where it comes from originally and how it's used there, and that's in Bordeaux, France, just like Cabernet Sauvignon, that also comes from there. Essentially, in Bordeaux, Cabernet Sauvignon rarely goes without Merlot. They're virtually always blended together. And in fact, we'll see later on that this is probably true most of the time in California as well, although wineries may not publicize this all that much that way. To be simple, Merlot has two key advantages over Cabernet Sauvignon. Number one, it ripens earlier and better. In a relatively cool climate like Bordeaux, which struggles to have ample and ripe Cabernet wines in some cooler vintages, this is very important because you can always rely on a riper, richer, fuller-bodied Merlot component in your blend if the vintage turns out to be cool, or if it starts raining during harvest, or if you have to live with this harsher Cabernet Sauvignon from a bad vintage. Advantage number two, Merlot is smoother, it's richer, it's oilier than Cabernet Sauvignon. Part of it is because it ripens earlier, of course, so it's fuller, it has more alcohol and more body. But it's also the nature of the grape, of the Merlot, to be smooth and round. So in a red blend, Merlot is always the richness, the body, the opulence, the oily texture, and the silky tannins as well, while Cabernet and potentially other blended grapes that you may want to put in a blend provide the acidity, the grip, and the personality. Also in Bordeaux, the left bank is warmer in its climate and also its soils that are sandier. Margaux, Pauillac, those types of appellations are on the left bank. They have more Cabernet Sauvignon because they can ripen Cabernet better from their warmer climate and soils, while the right bank, Saint-Emilion, Pomerol with cooler clay soils, has more Merlot because Cabernet can't quite live well with this cooler climate and those clay soils, while Merlot thrives exactly on those. So Merlot is the perfect counterpart, or in fact the perfect pairing partner to Cabernet. One is the tannic structure, the grape, the acidity, that's Cabernet. The other is the body, the richness, the smoothness, Merlot. And you'll see how this matters elsewhere, even outside of France, in just a moment. While Merlot and Cabernet are the two faces of the same coin in Bordeaux and in Bordeaux blends around the world, like in Meritage wines in the US, for example, Merlot itself has two faces depending on where it's grown. You see, Merlot is much more difficult a grape to make great than Cabernet Sauvignon. It's not depending on the skills of the winemaker that makes it, but purely on the terroir. I'd almost say only depending on the soil it is planted on. Cabernet Sauvignon you can plant virtually anywhere it's warm enough and the wine will turn out at least good, if not fantastic, excellent. That's why precisely Cabernet is the most planted red grape variety in the world. Merlot is different. You plant Merlot somewhere, it either turns out fantastic or it turns out really ordinary or bad. Hence the title, The Two Faces of Merlot. 90% of Merlot plantings around the world, I mean just as an image, it's not an actual statistic, but say 90% of those Merlot vineyards produce average, ordinary, if not bad Merlot. If you've ever tried a cheap Merlot from say Chile, Argentina, Australia, you know what I'm talking about. It's rather loose, it's a little harsh on your palate, it's not very enjoyable, just an ordinary wine. Now, to counter this, in California in particular, they had found a countermeasure. They would get the Merlot grapes very ripe, which is easily done because it's a very warm climate in Cali, of course, and Merlot ripens early as well. So they'd leave the grapes almost raisin and shrivel and concentrate in the vineyards. This would give extremely oily, extremely smooth and textural wine, often quite jammy and quite sweet as well. So California was famous for this style for a while. You probably remember that. Just like they were for oaky Chardonnays. That was a way to make bad wine appear really appealing, really good, even out of ordinary wine, making it jammy and sweet. But this style is exactly what caused the downfall of Merlot in the US. People got tired of this uncommon jammy style that was in fact just a commodity. It became one, a way to make money out of bad wine for wineries, and that's what the Sideways movie highlighted, to the favor of Pinot Noir that is way more subtle. Those points I've mentioned were the bad side of Merlot. Now, its bright side is that when a plantation of Merlot turns out to be good, it can turn out really good and give birth to some of the finest, the most expensive and the most delicious wines in the world. So let's have a look at where Merlot is planted around the world, successfully and not. And yes, you can make rosé out of Merlot, of course. You can even make white wine out of Merlot. Did you know that? But yeah, the majority are red, of course. Merlot is planted virtually everywhere in the wine world: Chile, Argentina, California, Oregon, Washington, South Africa, France, Spain, Romania, Slovenia, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, and there's quite a lot in China planted now too. In all of those countries, as I said before, the majority of Merlot wine is average, but it's easily grown, it's very easy to grow and to make, and it's a decent component for affordable red blends, if not rosés. Therefore, it is simply blended to make enjoyable but simple wines, and you probably don't even know Merlot is in there, you're not being told. It's a part of many blends in many countries. So, where are the good Merlots made then, you may wonder? Well, first and foremost, in its homeland of Bordeaux. Of course, Merlot is the base of the famed Saint-Emilion wines, of which many chateaux are some of the most reputable wineries in the world. Then is Pomerol, a small appellation in Bordeaux where Merlot is king, with most wines there being made almost entirely from Merlot, the most famous of all and expensive of them all being a wine called Petrus that sells for around $3,000 a bottle just when it's released, when it's young, and it can age beautifully for 30-40 years, sometimes more. Outside of France, you'll find good Merlot in Italy. There's some good fruity, precise Merlot grown in Friuli to the very west of the country, and to the north, a really nice and fruity, precise, well-made, not the best Merlots in the world, but very good examples. And the best ones in Italy and some of the best in the world are grown in Tuscany, in a small area that we've covered here a couple of times, and you've had some of those wines in your Italian selection, even though one of them was a Cabernet. But that same area called Bolgheri, in this part of Tuscany near the coast, they planted Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon almost by chance after World War II, and it turned out that they had found a very specific spot where the soil, the terroir, is almost identical, very clayey, very similar to the one in Pomerol in Bordeaux. So the result is that they managed to make some of the finest wines on earth out of Merlot, including what is, I think, the most expensive Italian wine of them all, that sells for north of $1,000 a bottle, and it's a 100% Merlot, and it's called Masseto, the most expensive wine in Italy, pretty much, I'm pretty sure, or around there. There's some great Merlots in California for sure, from serious wineries that don't overcook it, like I've described before. Many great wineries, of course, in Napa, Sonoma, make very nice examples. Some very nice Merlot coming out of Paso Robles in the Central Coast as well, from Oregon, Washington, even British Columbia, talking about the west coast of Canada. Chile has a specific area particularly suited to Merlot that's called Apalta in the Colchagua Valley. The Margaret River area of Western Australia successfully grows great Merlot as well, although they blend it with Cabernet, generally very much in a Bordeaux style with great similar results than in France. Margaret River, Western Australia. Delicious. Surprisingly and not famously, New Zealand makes delicious Merlot as well. I lived there for a while, 6 years, and if Merlot was a little more popular globally, I'd actually think New Zealand could come up with outstanding wines from Merlot, but they can't really develop that side of their industry, show off the world what they can make with Bordeaux, because nobody really wants to buy Merlot, unfortunately. And I'm sure China will come up with some good stuff from Merlot, although we might not hear about it very soon. They drink most of it, but who knows. As a conclusion, Merlot really is one of the best and of the great grapes in the wine world. I hope I've demonstrated this here. When it's well made, it makes balanced, very smooth and delicate wines with soft and dense tannins. It has a delicious dark cherry aroma signature, edging on the caramelly side, so very tempting, very delicious. It can make some of the finest and the most age-worthy wines on earth as well. Worth collecting and cellaring for decades, but it's also often the ugly duckling in the vineyards and the wineries when it's not planted on the right spot. I'd go as far as saying that Merlot is in fact the ghostwriter of the wine industry, in a way, or one of them. Those who know, know, and now you know. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Cheers. Santé.